Hello, everyone.
Uh, Hello.
Welcome to this Insta Live. Hi, Satyam. Hi, Edwin.
Hi. Hi.
Welcome to this Insta Live. I'm really excited to be talking about the Urban Fellowship Program at IIHS, the Indian Institute for Human Settlements in Bangalore. My name is Chandni Singh, and I work as a senior researcher at IIHS, and we will be today talking about the various aspects of the Urban Fellowship Program, why really this is an exciting program, any questions that any of you might have about um, applying to this, the journey that fellows take, and then where do our fellows end up with. I'm really glad that we've got uh, some of our alumni joining us to talk about their own journeys and also why they really decided to apply to the Urban Fellowship Program. So let me just get started by perhaps going around the room and just asking you all about just if you can introduce yourself. Edwin, I'm going to start with you. And what are you doing currently? What's your background? And why did you decide to even apply to the UFP?
Thank you, Chandni. Hi, everybody. I'm Edwin Elizabeth Thomas. I'm a senior research coordinator at the Center on Gender Equity and Health, UC San Diego. I currently work at the intersection of issues on gender equity and contraceptive use, reproductive health, and maternal health. I mean, background prior to the fellowship has been in journalism, literature, and psychology. So it was an interesting jump to come to UFP. I think one of the motivations for me was I needed a different way of understanding urban. I knew that, oh wait, somebody else was joining us. I knew that I wanted to look at the urban in a different way. I wanted to study. I had an inkling towards urban policy, but I felt like I didn't necessarily have the academic grounding that traditional programs at the time were offering. Must know that I was part of the 2017 batch. This is urban studies in India. That's like a lifetime ago. Like a lot has happened in the last 5, 6 years. Like we've jumped leaps and bounds in terms of the excuse me, in terms of the knowledge base. And I think fundamentally, I was looking forward to broadening my understanding of policy as it's located in the urban, with a particular focus on. But yeah, more on that.
Thanks so much, Edwin, and also really good that you can join us across time zones. I'll now turn to Satyam, and maybe you can also just give us a brief about what you're doing currently
Uh,
and why you
y-
joined.
yes. Yes. So, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So currently, I'm a fellow at Delhi Research Center, which is a part of Delhi Assembly. I'm attached to Malviya Nagar constituency, which in which I actually coordinate various amount of issues related to urban in particular. So at one point of time, I'm dealing with the Delhi Jal Board's officials regarding lack of water availability in various areas in and around Malviya Nagar constituency. At another point, I'm actually dealing with the MCDs at municipal level to cater the needs of the various pockets of Malviya Nagar where certain works are happening. So, for instance, if there is a road construction there, and uh, wha- how how that is affecting the other departments also, the other aspects also. So, uh, I'm currently engaged in more of a practice kind of thing, what UFP calls it a practice between theory and practice. Uh, my background is purely political science and action research. What motivated me towards finding IIHS UFP fellowship program was my field research around the 14 states, which I did while I was engaged as a research associate at NLU Delhi. Uh, I happened to be at the time when in 2018 the Kerala rains were happening there in Kerala around in December, and I saw the relief work both in urban LLP and in other rural areas. the judiciary officials were involved in relief making relief events and relief various relief programs. It triggered me to answer how resilience is actually related to the capacity of a state, uh, and this capacity is always there. You just need to change the system, right? So so then I came. I already knew about IIHS and UFP program back from my internship days because I worked in the think tank which actually focuses on climate change and international politics. So I thought that it will be a nice exposure to actually fabricate my practice of political science background into what actually it is within the urban. And then I joined yes. So, and I joined UFP, and it opened many layers of how you can see not only urban per se, but the issue of capacity in managing urban issues and all. So that was from my side. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, that's really nice to see also this breadth of then how you've now worked with the MCD using some of that teaching. But we'll get back to that in a bit. Prakar, thanks so much for joining. Lovely to see you. Also, just a quick introduction and what you're doing right now, and specifically why did you decide to even join a program like the UFP?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chandni. Hi all. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. So yeah, I am a lawyer by training. I did my specialization in environmental law, and I practiced for a bit at the NGT with an environmental law firm, and then went into teaching for a brief period of time. And I guess during both these workspaces, I realized that environmental law is being studied in isolation, or at least maybe I was seeing it from a very legalistic lens. And there was this always constant gap of not being able to understand how these laws actually translate onto the ground. So and then I accidentally stumbled upon this fellowship program, and when I went through the curriculum, it really fit well with what I was looking at in terms of where I want to take my this environmental legal training and sort of build it into a practice. So that I guess was the real motivation of trying to understand all these layers that they teach at the Commons, and I hope we'll talk about more about them. So not going into those depths, but yeah, the curriculum really struck out for me, and that's primarily why I applied.
And also, if you could just tell us a bit about what you're doing currently in your
day job. So currently, post UFP, I have been working as a sustainability consultant. So we work on a wide range of sustainability topics, starting from waste management to circular economy, industrial symbiosis, eco-industrial parks, helping corporates and companies to build more resilience in their operations and helping them sort of move towards a pathway which is more sustainable in the longer term.
Yeah. No, that sounds really, really interesting. So, all right. So now, just for those who are joining as we are speaking, we've been talking about the Urban Fellows Program, or the UFP, based at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. And as you all might know or have heard about, it's a 9-month fully residential scholarship-based fellowship at IIHS's Bangalore campus. And we have a range of things that happen in the fellowship program. And let's now get into a bit of that. Like what do we teach and how do we teach it? The first thing to remember is that there's a mix of both classroom teaching as well as what we call the practica and project-based teaching. So people actually are part of live projects and learn from that. But let's start with what we call the first bit of the fellowship, which is the Commons program. And maybe we can just go around, all the three of you, and just to think about what were some of the Commons that you were exposed to, what was interesting, what was not so interesting, and how does that help you even today, perhaps, in some of the work that you do. So maybe, Satyam, I can start with you this time, if it's all right. And you can just give the flavor of kinds of Commons courses that you found particularly useful.
Okay, I can't recall the subjects of comment, to be honest. Yes.
No
Okay.
problem.
Yes.
Even the broad
Yes,
thing.
because it's, I mean, yes, yes, I can do the broad thing. So, for instance, my background is not from as a civil engineer or architect background, right? I don't come from there. But what was interesting to know about that uh, I'll give an example from the practice which I'm kind of doing right now. So the roads are being laid in and around the Malvinagar constituency, right? So uh, the roads need the layering of the roads need to be entirely scratched through before laying the new roads, right? And the NCD officials and the construction company, which was allotted this whole thing to do, were not doing that. So it was my exposure to the collective learning from various architectures within my batch, right? Those who taught me that, okay, these are also layers where we need to see that a road is constructed, and if it's not if it is not entirely scratched away, or the layers have not been removed, the above layer, the another road which you will lay will not be stable enough, and it will not be that as solid as it should be. One of the things which I learned is that how a very simple aspect of 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 of, of another discipline can be implemented and is a major part of a policy area, as simple as laying the roads.
Absolutely. And I think that just to highlight, I think brings this very important point that apart from the classroom and practice-based teaching, we also have peer learning. And I think that's
Yes,
a very important part, right, of this whole story of the Urban Fellowship, because all of you come from such different backgrounds, also with various levels of experience. And even as a teacher, that's pretty challenging, but also exciting, because there's so much learning that happens from the peers in the classroom as well. So
yes.
that's really nice.
So for instance, in Commons, I think we learned about the history of how city is being, how a city is evolved, and how the architecture of the city is evolved. So Malvinagar has both the archaeological architecture, like Jahapana area is also there, and Begumpura area is also there, and Hausrani area. So these are so how slums comes up in this area. So we have, let's say, Kumar Basti and Indra Camp. These are the areas. So you tend to, the commons help me to understand that how the water which is being provided to them is actually is used efficiently in comparison to the water which is being provided to, say, other areas. Okay,
Yeah.
so in other why I mean this, how I observe this in other areas. I mean, gated societies, you get two times water. One in around 5 a.m., which is the water by the Malvinagar Water Systems Limited, and the other in terms of say you have a tube well water, right? And here in the Begumpur and Kumar Basti areas, you only get a tanker or one tube well. And still, in my constituency area, I seldom receive any complaint or an issue or escalation from these areas of that, we are not receiving water. But you will get an issue and complaint from all the gated societies that we are not getting water, the tube well water which we used to get now. And you tend to and you can tend to see how, where there is no formal connection of water, they are not complaining. It's not that they don't have a reach to it. They are better connected to the MLA office. The areas like Begumpur, Indra Camp, Kumar Basti, they are better connected to MLA's office, right? Rather than the RWS societies of Geetanjali, Shivalik and all. But
Absolutely.
I never. It amazed me that how gated societies they always lack water, and how these areas they don't have water issues as such.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think this is what, like in the Commons, these are ideas that we begin to talk about, things like informality, inequality, but
Yes.
then overlay it on urban infrastructure, urban services, and then you see how these complexities play out. And it's not always perhaps the most disadvantaged who are actually laying claim on the state and state services,
Yes.
but it's these gated communities and the more privileged. So I think, yeah, that's some of the, at least the idea in the Commons is to give you all some kind of a vocabulary to even start understanding some of these things, right?
Also the lens which Commons provide is very crucial. I think I couldn't have seen this uh, disparity kind of thing if the Commons would have not provided me the lens to see these things.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right, Edwin, maybe coming to you and your journey through the Commons, and were there any particular topics that you still use in your work, and just even if you could talk a bit about the structure of the Commons, anything that helped you or anything.
Yeah, I think for the folks watching, to think about the commons is basically think about like 17 different type of people coming in from various backgrounds in one classroom trying to figure each other out. So it's, I guess the goal of the commons is to get to a common understanding, a minimum common basic understanding of what the urban is. How did we get here to India's urban issue, which is a problem or opportunity or both? These are the questions that you begin to grapple with in the commons. So everything that was previously spoken about, things that are very visual and visible in the city, you know, the as we call it, the slum, or as I like to call it, the informal settlement, or the availability or lack of water. These are examples that the commons uses to build upon some central tenet ideas of identity, of governance, of infrastructure. I think one thing that few things that really impact some of the work I still do to this very day is how, for instance, Dr. Gautam Bhan, he at that time he led the identity commons. I don't know if he still does, but I think his oh, he still does. Oh, okay, I think his understanding of I mean, his very sharp understanding of how caste is very much embedded in how we understand inequality in Indian society was definitely something that brought the classroom to a common basic understanding of everything else. And how we need to integrate that with other sort of identity positionalities and complicating that. And these are not just, I would like to also be very clear, these are not just top down, I'm the instructor, I'm telling you this is it. These are sometimes very difficult discussions in the classroom. I'm sure Prakar would agree with me. Like these were, you know, there was a lot of back and forth, sometimes quite uncomfortable, but never to a point where it was unproductive. It was all to a point where we're laying the foundation for what was to come for the next 8 months. And I will say one more thing before I hand it off to Prakar. Um, the goal of the program is interdisciplinarity. At Commons, the goal is to get to a place of multidisciplinarity, where we are able to understand each other's, where we are coming from, the disciplines that we have worked with in the past, and sort of find a way to work in parallel with each other. Interdisciplinarity comes later, which we'll explore in a bit.
Thanks so much. That's over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Shanvi. And yes, Edwin, definitely, I do agree with most of what you said. And just taking it from there, I think for me, it personally worked out in a very different way because, again, because of the training that you come from, you read the documents in a certain way. So, say, for example, I was very used to reading Bare Act in a certain way, looking at them as very black letter and spirit of the law kind of text. But I think when looking at these layers, when reading about identity, informality, all of those things, I actually learned how to read policies then. And I, again, something that comes to mind is Gautam saying that, you know, policies are like poetry, like every word fights for its space in that text. And that really hit with me because that's when you start, you know, circling these questions and then everything that you've learned across all of these layers, then you start sort of questioning them on those lines as to what it. And for me personally, it happened because I was involved into environmental litigation, and evictions for that matter, how forced evictions happen, how they happen in the name of environmentalism, so yeah, that kind of, it sort of really build that common vocabulary coming from these disciplines, different disciplines. There were so many architects in the room, but despite all of that angst in the initial few classes, I think towards the end of the comments, we were sort of speaking in that same dialect, still navigating through what the other person was saying, but trying to understand where they're coming from and how we fit in there. So I think comments really helped me sort of get that idea, and to also see how we are going to proceed now through the electives and the practicum and the project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And maybe just to add also, the commons does provide, because people are coming from a different background, disciplines, but also from different levels of exposure, different cities, sometimes rural areas, and there is this push, or at least intent from the faculty to bring everyone, both, I mean, the vocabulary should be similar, or at least people start understanding the way different people use terms, but also language skills, and that kind of support is something that we really put a lot of emphasis on and at least try to bring up to speed. So in past cycles of the Urban Fellowship Program, what we've done is try to, for example, through dedicated office hours with faculty, students will have a time, fellows will have a time to have one-on-one conversations. If you're not comfortable in English, then if we can provide this, then at least in one other language, sometimes Hindi, Kannada, Malayalam, Tamil, we use all these ways to help some of the learners still feel engaged and be able to contribute meaningfully. All right. So now let's maybe move on to, before we get into the elective term, I'd really like to get into the practica, because that's a very core part of the curriculum at UFP. It's also one of the big pain points. I know that fellows often struggle, but I think at the end of it kind of realize the importance and use of the practica. So what did you go through in the practica? Can you just give me a flavor of that, if you remember at all now? And also maybe, let's talk about the practica, then we'll go on to the exposure. This is also an important part of the year. But maybe you can go.
I'll go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, practica. Oh boy, the tears and the lack of sleep that I think I still suffer from PTSD. I'm kidding, folks. It's a moment of levity. So the practica was one of our very first hands-on experiences with sort of taking some of the learnings we learned in a very controlled and safe environment and trying to apply some of those in what we would call a very messy situation. And by messy, not like, oh my God, let's get out of here, but messy more like, this is what our city looks like. And I think it's very important. Remember, the practica project, it allows us to look at very site-based issues. So yes, you're applying theory, but you're not thinking about all the problems of the universe under one roof. You're looking at a particular area, a very distinct area, which has a very specific history, specific cultural dynamics. And if it's like a market area, we're looking at place which has very specific economic dynamics that has formed over a period of time. And you're then looking at issues that that particular area has in connection to all these different things. And so I think, what I worked on as part of a group of 4 I was in. And by the way, this was a diverse group. I was a journalist, there was an architect, there was a sociologist, and there was an anthropologist. So you can imagine sometimes the messy chaos that came of something like this. But ultimately what we ended up producing was a very thick description of what homelessness looks like in Shivaji Nagar, which is, for those of you who don't know Bangalore, is an important market area in the city of Bangalore. That is also connected to the very important transport bus stand, and is essentially a center of a bustling commercial activity in the CBD of Bangalore. So what we looked at when we figured out, and like trying to figure out what the issue is, or trying to understand why we're looking at what we're doing, involved visiting the site multiple times over the course of many days, and constantly talking to a lot of people over there. And I think finally, some of my main learnings from that was to not get intimidated by what we are getting into. I think one key learning for me was that to first of all not try to look at issues. Sometimes when the issue demands it, there's definitely a necessity to scope down and say, okay, this is what we need to work on, and let's try to bring it. The other thing is to also look at how, one big learning for me was understanding how infrastructure works, and how informality in infrastructure works in these kinds of spaces. How our understanding of traditional systems-wide infrastructure that first world cities have had over the course of history does not necessarily apply to the global south as we see it, the urban and the global south. And so you're sort of being challenged in a space, in a very real, messy space that is also, but essentially also guided very much by by the faculty, by our individual office hours, where we're trying to get guidance on how we're looking at the problem. And it's not just, I think the practica allows us, and I'll hand over to Prakar after this, it allows us to ask the right questions. And I think that's important. I think one big issue is there's come to ask the right answers. I mean, to answer the right answers. But over here, it's about asking the right questions, and then we'll get to answers.
Absolutely. Prakhar, tell us about your practica experience.
Sure. So for our cohort, our practica theme was live, work, and play, and my team was part of the live group. And it also helped that we had like a boundary for our practica work. It was within a radius of RT Nagar in Bangalore. So we started, and I go back to the day. It's sort of a journey in itself, practica, because the first day it started as us being taken to the HMT ground in RT Nagar and simply just being told to observe. I mean, that's how it started. Look at things. Look at the city, how the city works. Look at how chaotic it is. Look at how what kind of things entice you to sort of work on them. And for the first term of the practica, I was looking at public infrastructure, just simply looking at how the state of things are, and then trying to map whose accountability is it, who would be responsible, why is it the way it is. I remember following a drain. Literally, I followed a drain and sort of a resource geography kind of thing. And so in the next term, we narrowed our topics down. So everybody initially worked on separate topics, separate things that interested them more. And it was really interesting to see how all of that somehow culminated into a focus of which was well within the theme of the live, as well as of everyone's interest area. So that bit was also very challenging to come to a common ground. And like Edwin said, it was a very diverse group. I was a lawyer. There were 2 architects. There were 2 political scientists and 1 anthropologist in my team. So it was really difficult to come to sort of agree. And somehow, once we did the first term, we all knew that, okay, this is what we want to look at. We started looking at rental housing. And in the second term of the practica, we were looking at broadly how sort of answering the question, why do people live where they live on rent in RT Nagar? Simply mapping out what kind of rental arrangements are there, and how do they live, what kind of precarity is there in these where they live. And then for the final term, it got even more specific. And then we realized that when we are looking at a topic like this, it can't just be done within the boundary of, say, 1 kilometer radius, because that does not really give you that insight. So our scope sort of expanded to other areas where we identified that there were other rental arrangements which would give us a better picture of what we are actually trying to address. So it sort of moved out of that boundary while looking at the similar question which we started with RT Nagar, and then looking largely at Bangalore through sample, of course, through a very sample methodology, sampling. We had to do some sort of sampling, and we eventually worked on basically looking at rental agreements as an instrument, almost as an artifact, to see what kind of practices are perpetuated through these rental agreements, what kind of landlord-tenant relationships exist, and then sort of try to propose a framework, building it also on the larger policy of the model tenancy, as to how that uniform legislation could be then adopted into a state legislation. So yeah, it was really interesting how it started and where it went to. It was really exciting. Yeah, that's all.
And it's wonderful to see how much of both of you have managed to remember a lot of your practica, which is really nice to see. Just for people who are tuning in and listening, we're talking about the Urban India Fellowship, the Urban Fellowship Program at IIHS, the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. And we have got Edwin and Prakhar, two alumni from the Fellowship Program, who are talking about their own journeys. We were right now discussing the first bit of the fellowship where we do common session. We bring everyone to a common platform of understanding what are cities, what's the urban, what's the vocabulary we use to talk about cities. Also trying to think about how do you build theory from cities in the global south, that is countries like India, but also then talking about the practica, which is a place-based exercise that we do for the first half of the UFP. Sometimes we run it for 4 months, up to 6 months, where fellows are really looking at all the issues that we talk about in the class, but in one site. And the place-based inquiry is meant to move from, say, developing a research question, or it may not be a research question, even just a problem that they see, to actually developing propositions. What can you do about it, or how do you even start thinking about solutions? It's not yet reaching solutions, just thinking about different ways of developing solutions. All right, so now let's get into perhaps what to me I feel is one of the most exciting bits of the fellowship, which is exposure visits. So we've been talking about the things that we do in Bangalore City so far. So we have the in-class teaching, then we have the practica. But let's now talk about the exposure visits. I know because of COVID, some batches didn't have physical exposure visits, but that is from last year onwards, we restarted those. So maybe just where did you all go for your exposure visits? What was the experience like, and what did you really take away from some of your exposure visits that you did? You have a
Our cohort actually did not go for it. We did not go.
Yeah. Two didn't get to go for some of these exposure visits. We started them last year. But Edwin, tell me about your exposure visits, and then perhaps I'll talk about some of the other ways we've done it for the batches.
All right. So this was a much different era many, many years ago. So there was no such thing as COVID. We went to, some of us went to Chennai and half of us went to Bombay. And then we had a trip to Amravati in Andhra Pradesh together after that. So I will talk a little bit about Chennai, which was actually the one that I really enjoyed the most. So I think the exposure trip to Chennai, we were able to, I guess one thing I'll be honest is I was really struggling why we were doing this. I think when we went to Chennai, I was like, why can't we just read about this, preferably in an AC environment back in the main campus in Bangalore? Why do we really need to do this? And I think a lot of that changed when we started meeting activists on the ground, when we met government officials in their offices, and we were trying to piece together what some of the main ecological concerns that face the city of Chennai. This was 2 years after their disastrous floods, if you remember the 2015 floods. And I think there was a big push from the academic community and the activist community in Chennai and Tamil Nadu to figure out, where did this come from? What have we been doing wrong for so long? Who has been sort of warning us about, for instance, looking at how the city has, for many years, has managed to sort of do away a lot with their marshlands. That was one big thing that has impacted that city. To also understanding the kind of pollution that, for instance, a part of the Ennore Creek has been facing in North Chennai, to understanding how factories have been contributing perhaps to that, to also but complicating that a little bit and not just looking at encroachment as the main issue that faces cities. Well, encroachment is also a way for people for workers who don't get adequate housing in the city, find a way to manage to find places to stay. And that is one way. The other way is looking at informality of housing, even if you're not a migrant worker. These were very complicated and complex issues that we got to see play out in real time in front of our eyes. We we could see, for instance, we also looked at how some things are more fragile than the others. The olive ridley turtle hatching, for instance, at Elliot's Beach. We spoke to activists over there, and essentially what we were trying to do is look at, is take some of that learnings once again, that we had in a controlled environment, but also, and then just take all of that and then throw it away, because ultimately a lot of that was also challenged in terms of the kinds of problems that we were looking at, that we were trying to understand. So that was Chennai for me. I don't know about Bombay. I don't like the city of Bombay, so I ain't talking about that. Amravati was a whole different ball game. So for those of you who don't know, this was before this current government. Amravati was meant to be the new capital under the Nehru government, the new capital of Andhra Pradesh. And what he did was pretty crazy. He wanted to build a greenfield capital from scratch, and essentially undertook one of the world's largest, I think, land pooling schemes that essentially should be mired in controversy and, I think, legal issues. But back then, we got to see the precarity of it all. Like, okay, so there's nothing. So we were staying in Vijayawada. So there's nothing in Amravati. It's literally just a few government buildings that apparently has leaks all the time. And so we went to these offices and we were talking to these people, and we were trying to understand what their goal of creating this massive city with limited funding. They didn't get as much funding as they were expecting from the center. And they were moving on from looking at a tri-capital kind of situation that I think even IIHS had recommended to the director, R. Omar. So they had this plan that we could really see was precarious. And we realized that, and I remember one of our instructors, Dr. Sudeshna Mitra, after a while we were having dinner, and she's like, all of this can come crashing down the minute he loses the election. And that's essentially what happened. It was almost as though she foresaw the future. We saw the city of Amravati not pan out the way that they had perhaps wanted it to pan out. And all the issues that we have seen, the disastrous land pooling, the lack of sort of connectedness to what that would do to the river Krishna, I believe, that flows through that city. All of that never finally panned out. And I think today we are back to, a multi-capital situation, if I'm not mistaken. So those were our two trips. And yeah, I would say very different. Chennai is a city with a long, rich history, and facing severe ecological issues, which is probably only going to get worse if it's not addressed in the way that we perhaps would like to see it. Amravati is like a greenfield issue, and sort of understanding what it takes to the precarity of land, the precarity of whose land is pooled. I think there's a paper out that IIHS, I think, recently put out on identity and land in Amravati, which I think is very interesting. So shout out to that. Take a look at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Edwin. So I think just to highlight again, the exposure visits tend to be a mix of large cities, the Bombays, the Chennais of India, and also some smaller cities, or in your case, for example, a greenfield city, a completely new city that was set up and actually modeled along the lines of Singapore, which itself is, you wonder how that was seen as a model for an Indian city, and why do we have these urban aspirations that are all glass in a certain way. So those are the questions that we hope fellows answer, or to start questioning when they go for these exposure visits. So last year the exposure visits were, or this batch, the current batch that is still ongoing, exposure visits have been again in large cities like Hyderabad and Mumbai, and then smaller cities in Tamil Nadu, Trichy, and so on. So I just want to emphasize this, that we try to also take fellows out into cities, talk to different kinds of people who are not only researchers and academics, but actually practitioners who are activists on the ground. There may be small civil society organizations, NGOs that are actually doing work around, say, solid waste management, gender equality, and so on. So the range of learning
opportunities, I think, for the exposure to this, which even for me as a faculty is pretty exciting. So I'm sure it's meaningful for the fellows. All right, so at this point, I just want to say for all the people who joined that we are accepting questions. If you can type in your questions, we're very happy to, I'll be happy to pose them to our alumni fellows, but also happy to take any questions around, say, funding, housing, and coming to Bangalore, getting involved in the classroom, all of that. Very happy to discuss any, at least take a bunch of questions. So please just feel free to put them in the chat. Let's continue the journey. We started with the UFP Commons. We talked about the Tactica, that's the place-based inquiry in Bangalore. Then we spoke about the exposure visits, which is going out to different cities to understand some of the theoretical things we learn in the classroom and see them play out in our very complex cities. And then let's move to what we call the elective term, which is, and here also maybe we can talk about some of the advanced skill labs that we do. So if we could just give me a flavor of what electives you chose, how did that pan out, and also some of the other skills that you learned as part of this advanced skills labs that we have under the fellowship. Prakhar, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Sure. So yeah, elective terms, again, we have a range of electives to choose from. That's definitely something that's the most exciting, and it's like a palette that you can choose from. So of course you sort of try to align your electives the best you think are fit for as per your training and as to where you want to, what kind of space you want to work in. But there's also an opportunity here to learn something that you have not learned before. So, say for example, for me, one of the electives that I had never really, or something that I had never explored before was public health. Now, even while learning the elective, I may have been feeling that is this really going to help me in the future? But that's not the point, I guess. The point is that even though I may not be directly working on any of those issues per se, but I have found the frameworks that I learned there, or even the terminology that I picked up from there, the online resources that I got exposed to, how to get that information, that has proven helpful in terms of at least my consulting experience. So in terms of looking at how those skills actually translate to your job, I think it really is also an opportunity, which I was mentioning, that you can explore so many different things here in electives, apart from what you want to study and what you already know. Of course, and added benefits come from the advanced skill labs. Now, most of us do not have these skills that they are teaching. I mean, people coming from social sciences background, maybe the architects would know GIS or would know Google, how to use Google Earth Pro, or would, okay, so maybe not always true, but we actually got exposed to so many different tools of, and not, I wouldn't say it was just during the skill labs. It was not only in the advanced skill labs, it was also during the first few sessions we had on skill labs, or even during other commons, say for example, how to design a survey, as simple as that. What tools to use, how to record that data, how to quantify them, and then come to sort of analyze them. So these are something that a lot of people who enter UFP, from what I've heard from my cohort, do not have these skill sets from where they are coming from, and it really then adds on to your skill set of what you know. Of course, it's a short program, so you cannot expect to become a master in that particular skill, but it definitely gives you that pathway of if you're interested, or if you find that useful in your work trajectory, you can take these skills forward, and then with continuous practice or any other courses that you want to do after that. But yeah, and yeah, one more thing is that there's a skill lab called the Word Lab, which is again as part of academicians and researchers. We do need to write a lot, and what I felt was that writing an op-ed, for example, we had a session on writing an op-ed, which again most of us would not have done before. So that becomes and that sort of insight when you hear it from the people who are writing consistently, and the kind of mistakes they make even after years of writing. It's really good to hear that and then sort of learn from that, and then see your own writing, what you used to write, I mean, say 4 years back and now post these days. So that kind of assessment and that comparison is that really is helpful. At least in my experience, that was the case. And I will hand over to Edmund to speak more about it. Yeah.
Thanks. Building off of what Prakash was saying, so I think for me, electives, how I understood was that if the commons were about breadth, the electives were about depth. It's about finding like specific ways of looking, going in focus, going very. So, for instance, I took one of the electives I took was sanitation. So I saw that as a way of going deeper into what I had seen in the commons class on infrastructure, and how we were looking at perhaps smaller scale levels of sanitation in the city, and what does that look like? What does the supply chain look like in something like that? Now, these are things I would perhaps never have considered wanting to think about. And I think a good question perhaps some folks would have is, but what are the transferable skills or something like that if you don't even know if that's something you want to focus on? I guess one thing for me from understanding looking at so deep in sanitation is perhaps understanding that our cities and this infrastructure we need not have an imagination of that being these these network-based, large systems that are difficult to manage, that are really expensive. I think with sanitation, we got an applied sense of what a smaller scale system could look like, and what that means for communities and how to function something like that. And this was conducted by folks who are working in the Coimbatore, the work that IIHS does in Trichy and Coimbatore. Or I'm getting some cities wrong, but in Tamil Nadu somewhere. And guys, it's a very long time. I'm very old. And so this was, this was a very helpful elective for me. There were very fundamental, difficult questions also asked in class because, sanitation as it was seen as a very technical sort of space. And, the class always asked the question, we cannot talk about sanitation in India without talking about caste. Like, we just simply cannot do that. And so there was a back and forth. And I think that just improved the nature. And which brings actually to a larger point generally about UFP is that for those of you who are thinking that this is, the urban side is just like a technical side that's left for technocrats, for people dealing with the details, it's anything but. It's, it's the activists, it's the researchers, it's everybody who makes the city for making it livable. And our engagement with it is not necessarily social only, it's not necessarily technical only. And I guess the center is trying to create, and it has successfully, I think, a new urban studies. And I think that's what it does. But coming back to electives, one more elective I would like to focus on before moving on is reading the city. So this is for folks, I don't know if you guys, I think there was something on, something similar to that last year. But when we had it, reading the city was about understanding the city through text. It was for those of you who have inklings towards English, towards literature, towards, critical analysis, this was the elective to be at. We had somebody who was teaching at IFLU, Hyderabad, who was visiting faculty for us. And I think we got to really look at poems and texts that made us look at cities as not just a policy issue. Sometimes we can really get lost in the fact that, okay, it's policies, programs, laws. No, there is an emotional angle to it. There is the feeling of being in the city, belonging. What does belonging in the city mean? What does queerness in a city mean? These are aspects that you are able to grapple with in a very different way using some of these electives. In terms of skill lab, I took data visualization, which I thought was great, handled by I think some of the folks from the urban informatics lab. And it's a skill I still don't do.
Thanks so much. I think that really covers the breadth of a lot that we do at the electives. I also, I think, Edwin, thanks for reminding us about visiting faculty. And often, it's the courses, all the topics that we teach also draw on a wider group of researchers and practitioners who come in to do master classes at some points, but also sometimes co-teach several courses at the UFP. So that's another way that we encourage breadth of different ideas and different, just visions of what a good, livable, equitable, sustainable city really means. All right, I've seen that we've got a few questions, so let's take those and then we can continue. We've also last 10 minutes of this session. So the first one, I think, Aishwarya, you had a question about placement, and yes, it's a question we get often, so I'm glad you asked it. So the UFP, the fellowship actually makes sure that every fellow gets internships. So there's a whole series of first of all, getting fellows prepared for internships. There are various options they are provided, and then also mock interviews to actually prepare for these internship interviews. And then fellows are matched with organizations across various types of organizations. We've had fellows join grassroots civil society organizations, activist groups sometimes, right across to being an RA for a particular research assistant for a particular university, and then also some people going into consultancy and those kinds of more corporate-facing internships. So there's a range of internships. We do not promise placements, but here are some of our fellows, and then we've also started out trajectories of different fellows who have actually gone on very successfully to land jobs. So there is a from our side that enables you to get placed, but that's not promised as part of the fellowship. Internships are. Many fellows have actually converted their internships into placements as well. So that's also important to remember. But if you have other questions, I mean, I know that you said that there is a section on placements on the website. Just for those who don't know, it's called urbanfellows.ihs.co.in. And also to say that there are some trajectories that we have shown on the website, which perhaps will be useful for you to see, that where you start from, what disciplines, what training, and then where do you go to work. That can also give you an indication of what kinds of placing trajectories fellows are taking. I just see a couple of questions related to the point of placement, so I'm just going to take them together, and then maybe if anybody wants to also jump in, please just do that. All right. Yeah. So in terms of PhDs and applications for that. All right. So coming to the age limit for the application, as far as I remember, if you're born in after 1993, but the full details are there on the website, and I'll really ask you to look at that carefully. We go right from people who are straight out of school, might have a bachelor's degree or not. We've had fellows who have postgraduate degrees. So there is a range of, learnings that people have also come with. So far as I remember, we've not had people who have done a PhD just because of the age thing, but you can see if you fall in the age criteria, and if you do, you are welcome to apply. The idea is that the class is carefully crafted to make sure that there is a mix of different types of learning journeys. We have people who are first generation learners, for example, people from different disciplines. But at the start, at the application stage, we have a very detailed criteria of trying to bring in people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of skill sets. So if you fall within the age bracket, I would say do apply and see how that goes. There was one question someone has asked about waste management, and I think the person said that they're an environmentalist and then might want to get into waste management as a sector. Yes, we do have quite a focus on that. We have teaching that happens around solid waste management. In a lot of the exposure visits, there's quite a lot of focus on actually taking you to landfill sites, taking you to understand waste segregation. How does caste, gender, and race really intersect? So there is a bit of that, and I think what I would say is, apart from your core, if you want to build out waste as the topic that you want to build your work around, you will be able to bring in so much more to the university. So that is what I would see as a strength. So adding on to your core interests rather than only, of course, you go deeper and you have lots of people at IIHS, but also beyond, who can sort of help you go deeper into this, but there is that broader ecosystem which we encourage people to learn about. We always talk about this, that we want system thinkers for systemic problems in cities. So we can't have, sectoral people tinkering around. That's important, but we really need the big question that is plaguing Indian cities is how do we think of these things systemically and collectively? And that's what we aim to train you all to do. All right. I think there was one question about work-life balance and how do you keep sane? Because I know this is a concern, and I would really like both of you to talk about this, Ratna and Urban, because it is an intense fellowship. There's no two ways about it, right? It's an intense fellowship. It's often moving way out of your comfort zone. People who are used to suppose, like I know so many people come from an urban planning or architecture background, struggling with some of the other kinds of, the ecology and sustainability courses, versus someone like Satyam, you coming from a law background and then being thrown into the deep end of, say, geospatial analysis and all of that. Maybe you were good at it, I'm not saying you weren't, but just this, having to saddle all of this while also dealing with coming to a new city. Many people don't know the language. Many people thrown into a completely different cultural setting. So just give a few thoughts on this whole idea of well-being and managing your time. Everyone, over to you.
Yeah, intense. So let's start there. It's like being thrown off the deep end of a pool, but in a good way, because you do end up always coming and rising to the surface. So it's not, you can definitely overcome it. But I want to say a couple of things. One thing that really, a couple of tools IIHS does provide, it's a very empathetic space. UFP, IIHS does provide a very empathetic space towards understanding that, listen, these are not employees. These are students who, come from various backgrounds, who perhaps some of us, some struggle a little bit more than others, and they're very cognizant of that. So something that was very helpful for me was office hours with specific faculty that helped me to really talk through some of my issues. Some of these office hours were also very personal, I must say. Though I never tried to make it that personal, I know there were many others who did. Kudos to them. And I think that really helped some of them, really work out how they were fitting into the program and otherwise. The other thing I think really mattered for me before I hand this off to Pratha was living together. Like we were all put together in the same building. I don't know if that's still the case, but it is still the case. So yeah, you all will be put together in the same building, and that really helps. See, when you're thrown off the deep end of a pool, it helps that there are 30 others who are thrown off with you. You're sort of figuring it out together. You're doing your projects in those like rooms with each other after class. It really makes a difference, and it's not as though we don't get our weekends. These are spurts, I must say, for something a little more realistic. There are spurts of activity, and then there's also times when we get to go and have a drink in the city. That's very much part of the urban experience, y'all. So, and there are ways to like blow off steam, and IIHS does allow for, and IIHS also conducts a lot of festivals throughout the year and conferences. So, film festivals, academic conferences, and there's sort of adjunct events that one can take part in that really make a lot of this a whole lot better. So there's a lot of space to breathe, but get ready. It's 9 months of your life that you want to commit to, and I don't think it's something that you can do along with a full-time job. So don't even think about that.
Yeah, I echo the same. Yeah, I would echo the same thing that Edwin is just saying. But I will confess that it's not a bed of roses. It's not going to be all glitters and rainbows. But so you will be, like everyone has been saying, you will be thrown into the deep end. And I think most of it is coming from just being exposed to new areas of learning. But I think I personally have not felt a point where any of my personal concerns that I raised were not addressed or were not considered. The faculty as well as my peers have always been very mindful of accommodating me, of if I'm not being able, if I'm not feeling up to it. I have never felt that I was pressurized into doing something that I did not want to do. So that you always have that breathing space. Plus, like Edwin also said, that there are these bouts of these breathing spaces which you get during your after your classes, during the weekend. There will be a reading week in between where you will not be actually attending classes, but just simply focusing on your work, your project work. So it will be intense, and I would also not recommend you to come with a full-time program. Maybe if you have some pending work, try to finish it ASAP before you join. So I think, yeah, that would be my suggestion. But do not hesitate to come. So everything said, please do, because this is one experience that I feel every professional who is, or a fresher or a person who wants to do sort of a continuing education kind of thing, you should definitely experience something like this. It will open up your mind to so many avenues, and yeah, I think it's definitely worth a try, worth a shot to come here, despite all of everything that we have said about the intensity of the course. Yeah.
And I think just to add to that, perhaps the intensity, of course, that's what a lot of us do. So in the end of the project, we are having this bifurcation where after the end of the fellowship, and after you do your commons and electives, you then have a choice of either going into live projects that are at IIHS. You also have the opportunity of doing an internship, and then which is different from the practica. And then you also have the opportunity of doing a slightly more for people who are more focused on research and wanting to perhaps do a PhD. There is an option of doing a sort of thesis-based, I wouldn't call it a full-fledged thesis, but a smaller piece of research that sort of helps to build up to a PhD application. So these are the three paths that you take after all the in-class teaching from this year. At least this is what we are expecting to do. So if you look at that, there is, depending on your trajectory, there's a lot of counseling that happens through your officers, but also through even people who you may not be taught by, but are interested in that subject. You are able to navigate that through those one-on-one conversations. All right, I do want to pick up one question, which again is very timely and comes up again and again about economics. So the scholarship, how is it funded? So of course, you can see the full tuition fees is on the website. We very that the program is needs blind. What I mean by that is you are judged on the basis of your application and all the details you provide in your application. So at the first stage, that shortlisting stage, it is completely needs blind. There is no discussion around financial needs. Once you are shortlisted and you go through the interview process, after that, based on your equal financial needs, scholarships are provided. The entire batch does not get scholarships. It is very, very much dependent on each person's personal conditions, and for that, proof of financial need has to be provided at the start. There can be a waiving of tuition fees. In some cases, there's further financial aid that's provided for living expenses and so on. So there is that need-based thing that comes in after you've been selected to the program and not prior. So that is something for you all to keep in mind. All these details are also there on the website, if that helps. Yeah, and maybe then this last question, I think, on the internship, just to say, I think it's Ahalya who asked this question around whether the practica and internship are the same thing. No. The practica is very much part of the teaching that happens in the first 6 months of the program, where you are 1 day of the week, of your teaching week or learning week, you are expected to go and actually go to a site and apply what you're learning in the classroom to that site, and it's a guided sort of teaching. So there's a whole team of people who work with you during the practica from IIHS and the faculty. This is very different from the internship which happens at the end of the program. And maybe Edwin, if you could talk about your internship experience a bit, and prefer you to just very short, let's keep it really short because of time.
Yeah, so when I was at IIHS, it was a 7 + 2, 7 months learning and 2 months internships or a structure. I did an internship in Delhi. I was at that time on journalism, and I had interest in taking some of my learnings and using it in writing. I think so. While the institution does help everyone with their internship process, I did not perhaps need it as much. So I did that independently, fixed my own interview, and I think for me, the internship experience was very interesting. I was able to write quite a few pieces based on some of the work, based on some of the things I studied at IIHS. What you need to expect after that is essentially to file a report, make a report that sort of describes the work that you did there and sort of connect that a little bit to what you learned from UFP. And that's like your final thing, final submission from at least from my batch. I think that's how it was framed. As I must say though, for me, what was more rewarding was not the internship. What was more rewarding was the project. That was the turn I took for. I worked on a breastfeeding and working on improving the rates of exclusive breastfeeding among informal workers in Delhi, and I think that's what took my interest into public health, which I'm working to this day.
Yes, tell us about your internship, please.
So my experience was also a little bit similar of Edwin. So I did sit through the internship process, but I guess I went ahead with. Is there some disturbance from my end?
We're now.
I think this. I thought my laptop. Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, I did go through the internship process, but I think I ended up joining a place where I am currently working at. So I directly joined them, and since it was also a bit of a transition for me to move into consulting space, I did treat it as an internship at first, but it came in as a job offer. So yeah, but IIHS does allow you. There's a whole range of organizations. You get like a list to choose from. And you can identify the places which you want to intern at. So there's a lot of leeway in terms of selecting what organization, what kind of organization you want to work with. So and the faculty will be with you every step of the way to help you decide which one to go for, which one to choose. And your priorities are considered. It's not just like they will give you your second or the third priority. They usually try to give you your first priority of the organization that you want to work with. So that's really helpful in planning that internship. And then
Yeah. For every fellow, there are around 2 to 3 internship opportunities available, and they get to choose from those. Of course, some, like in these cases, I mean, I think there's also that openness to go your way, and then some of them can lead into full-time jobs, which is great. All right, I think we are quite over time, so let's close this session. I want to end by thanking both of you so much for spending the time to do this. It's really so fulfilling to see fellows come back and talk about the program. So very grateful.
But again, yeah, it's not like IIHS guys. That's another thing. Once you join and you become alumni, they reach out to you 1,001
yeah,
times.
exactly.
So you guys have us to rely on for everything. When I was there, we didn't have much of alumni to rely on for internships. Now UFP is there everywhere. There are people working everywhere.
Yeah, we have UFP alumni chapters in Delhi, in Mumbai, Bangalore's coming up recently. We've also got alumni. There's a big group in New York in that area, and they've been meeting up. So there's this wider group of alumni that also become part of your, agony aunts in some ways, but also then able to link you up to placements, internship opportunities, all of that. And we facilitate that. There are LinkedIn groups and so on as well, but also other more informal channels to link up to that. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. For those of you interested, there are lots of details on the website around this called urbanfellows.ihs.co.in. Thank you so much for listening in. If you have any further questions, write to us. All the details are there on the IIHS's website, but also various social media. Thanks so much. Bye, Edwin.
Bye, Chandni. Bye, Prakash.
Bye-bye.